My daughter-in-law has always spoken about money like she invented it. She'd correct people at dinner tables, brag about her business instincts, and treat anyone who didn't worship her opinions like they were beneath her. And for years, she saved her sharpest little insults for me. She'd wait until my son left the room, then tilt her head and say things like, "Harry, do you even know how compound interest works?" Or, "You should let us manage your checks so nothing gets misplaced." She loved that pause. That tiny hint that she thought I was too old, too slow, too clueless to handle my own life. That woman called me financially illiterate more times than I can count. Once at Thanksgiving, she even laughed about it to her friends. Laughed. My own dining room, my own table. But I didn't rise to it. Not because I was weak, because she didn't know who she was talking to. She didn't know the kind of life I lived before any of them came along. She didn't know that while she was chasing social media business tips, I'd spent 40 years building something only a handful of people on Earth knew existed. She didn't know that every time she mocked me, she did it standing on a foundation I paid for. And she definitely didn't know that the anonymous investment fund she'd been begging for a loan from was mine. Before I take you into the moment she walked into that conference room and realized the truth, stick around with me. These stories I share aren't fiction. They're pieces of a lifetime. Lessons carved out of bruises, mistakes, and a few triumphs I never expected. If you enjoy these journeys, you're welcome to stay close. There's always another story waiting in the wings. My son married her young. Too young, if you ask me, but love makes people think they're bulletproof. At the beginning, she put on the sweetest mask you ever saw. Polite, warm, a little too polished, but I chalked it up to nerves. But the moment the ring was on her finger, she changed tones like flipping a switch on a cheap lamp. She took control of their finances immediately, every bill, every account, every decision. My son didn't even notice at first. He was in love with her confidence, her organization, the way she walked through life like she owned the exclusive rights to common sense. But it was control, pure and simple. And control only works if you convince everyone else they're unworthy of it. That's where I came in. She decided that if she could make me look incompetent, it would make her look indispensable. So she told people I was forgetful, that I couldn't keep track of my own wallet, that I didn't understand technology, or banking, or budgeting. All of that rolled neatly into the nickname she whispered just loud enough for me to hear. The financially illiterate one. She didn't know I heard her. She always underestimated my hearing. I kept my mouth shut because sometimes silence is stronger than a fist. But let me paint the picture clearly. While she was lecturing me about credit scores, I was quietly managing a fund with more zeros than she had Instagram followers. A fund built from decades of small, smart choices. Early work in the tech sector during the right years. 2 patents that I sold at exactly the right time. And a habit of living small while investing big. My own children didn't know the full extent of it. They knew I was comfortable. They didn't know I was wealthy. And I didn't tell them. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I wanted them to grow into their own success, not orbit mine. But her? She never suspected a thing. Why would she? She thought she had me pegged, an old man with a beat-up truck and dusty sneakers who didn't mind sitting in the corner during family gatherings. Then her little business started falling apart. At first it was whispers, late-night phone calls she tried to hide, my son pacing around the kitchen with worry on his face. Next came the sudden inflation of her pride. People who are losing everything often yell louder to hide the sound of things breaking. The truth was simple. She took on more loans than she could handle, tried to expand too fast, mismanaged almost everything she bragged about managing, and when it all began to crumble, she did what people like her always do. She looked for someone to bail her out. Not family, of course. She couldn't lower herself to ask us directly. Instead, she went searching for real investors. She found a fund, my fund, through a broker who had no idea she was my daughter-in-law. Life has a funny sense of humor sometimes. She filled out the form like she was applying for royalty. Glossy language about her vision and brand influence. A desperate lunge disguised as confidence. My advisory team flagged the application, forwarded it to me as a courtesy, and I nearly laughed when I saw the name. And that's when I realized This wasn't just karma arriving on time. This was a chance to teach a lesson that would stick for the rest of her life. But before we walk into that room together, take a breath with me. The next part of this story is where the ground shifts, and I promise you, it's worth every second. I didn't respond immediately. Timing matters more than truth in moments like these. If I walked in too early, it would look like I was trying to embarrass her. If I waited too long, she might wiggle out of the mess she created. No, I needed the moment to be clean, precise, a lesson she couldn't twist into a story where she played the victim. So I called my advisor, a sharp woman named Lydia, who's been with me since the fund was nothing but a dream and a folding chair in a tiny rented office. I told her, set the meeting, conference room B, and don't tell her who she's presenting to. Lydia chuckled. This one's personal, isn't it? I didn't deny it. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. I didn't mention it to my son. This wasn't about dragging him into the fire. This was about showing the person causing the fire where the extinguisher was, and who controlled it. He didn't know half the things she said to me when he wasn't around. He didn't know how many times she told people I was too old to understand the modern world, too stupid to manage anything more complicated than a grocery list. He didn't know how often I swallowed the hurt because I didn't want to put him in the impossible position of choosing between his father and his wife. But one afternoon earlier that week, I found him in their garage sitting on a broken stool, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. He wasn't crying, but he was close. "Dad," he said, I'm trying to keep her business alive. I'm trying to keep us afloat. She's been talking to investors, but nothing's landing. I don't know what to do." And there it was, the thing that hit me harder than any insult ever could. She wasn't just sinking her own ship. She was drowning my son with her. I put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Just breathe. Things have a way of shaking out right when they need to." I didn't promise him it would get better. I didn't promise him I'd fix it. Promises can become debts, and I wasn't going to put that weight on him. But I walked away from that garage with a fire in my chest I hadn't felt in years. Friday came. I arrived early, as old men tend to do, sat at the head of the long glass table, the city skyline glowing behind me. I kept the room dark except for the soft light above the table. I wanted her to walk into something that felt serious, not intimidating, just honest. At 2:02 p.m. exactly, I heard the elevator down the hall, then heels clicking, fast, nervous. She always walked slower when she was confident, faster when she was scared. She rounded the corner, saw the door open, and entered with a bright, brittle smile plastered on her face. "Hello. I'm so grateful for this opportunity," she began, looking straight at her laptop instead of the person at the table. "I have an exciting—" Then she looked up and saw me. The smile froze. Not melted. Froze. Like her whole face forgot what it was supposed to do. "Harry?" she whispered, voice cracking in the middle. I didn't move. Didn't change expression. Just looked at her the same way she'd looked at me 100 times, like I was evaluating someone who wasn't measuring up. You work here?" she stammered. "I built here," I said calmly. "I built all of this." Her mouth moved, but nothing came out. She clutched her laptop tighter. Her knuckles went white. She took one small step backward like she was thinking about running. But pride pinned her down. Pride always does. "I didn't know you were involved with—" "The fund?" I interrupted. "You've been applying to it for months, sending in proposal after proposal. You told your friends it was owned by serious financial minds." She swallowed hard. "I didn't think—" "That I could be one of them?" I asked. Silence. She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She just stood there, shoulders shaking, finally realizing what her words had cost her. I leaned back in my chair. "Go ahead," I said. "Give me your pitch." She looked like a child forced to walk onto a stage with no lines memorized. But she opened the laptop anyway. Because for the first time since I'd known her, she understood she wasn't in control. And for the first time since she married my son, I understood that this moment was only the beginning of her reckoning. She stood there shaking, clutching that laptop like it was a life raft. I could see her swallowing hard, trying to gather whatever scraps of confidence she had left. And for a moment, just a moment, I wondered if I was being too harsh. But then I remembered every time she'd stood in my kitchen talking down to me. Every time she'd bragged about her strong financial instincts, while implying I'd lived my whole life stumbling in the dark. Every time she made my son feel small, because he didn't make as much money as she wanted him to. So no, I wasn't being harsh. I was being honest. And honesty was the one thing she'd never shown me. She opened her laptop slowly and clicked through her slides with trembling fingers. My company, she began, voice thin as tissue, is a lifestyle brand aimed at young mothers seeking... I raised a hand. Stop! She froze. Her eyes darted to the floor like a student caught cheating. Don't pitch me slogans, I said. Tell me what the problem is, and tell me the truth. Her mouth twitched, the way it always did when she was about to lie or dress the truth in glitter. But lying to a stranger is one thing. Lying to the man who's eaten Thanksgiving dinner with you for years? Harder. She lowered her gaze. We're behind on payments, she whispered. Suppliers, rent, payroll. It all moved faster than I expected. And your loans? I asked. She hesitated. I took 3. 3, I repeated. Or 5? Her head snapped up. How did you? You applied to my fund, I reminded her. We do our homework. She deflated completely then, shoulders slumping, pride leaking out of her like air from a punctured tire. Watching her, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt the kind of heavy sadness you feel when someone you care about gets hurt. Not because someone attacked them, but because they refused to listen to the warnings that could have saved them. She took a shaky breath and said, I didn't think you'd be the one behind this place. You didn't think I could, I corrected softly. You didn't think an old man with a worn-out truck had the brains to build something real. She opened her mouth, closed it, then whispered, I'm sorry. But the apology wasn't for what she'd done. It was for being caught. There's a difference. Still, I gestured toward the chair. Sit. She did. The room was so quiet I swear I could hear the city breathing outside the windows. Now, I said, tell me why you came here instead of asking the family for help. She chewed her lip. I didn't want your son to know how bad it is. I nodded. And why not? She stayed silent. Because you've spent years pretending you run everything flawlessly, I answered for her. You thought if he saw the cracks, he'd stop believing in the illusion. She winced like I'd slapped her, but I wasn't wrong. She looked at me then with eyes that weren't proud anymore, eyes that were finally human. Harry, she whispered, I'm drowning. I thought I could handle everything. I thought I was good at this. And when it all started going wrong, I didn't know how to admit I failed. There it was, the truth that had been hiding behind her arrogance the whole time. Fear. Fear of being ordinary. Fear of being judged. Fear of being less impressive than the image she'd built. I leaned forward. You're not the first person to be scared of failure, but you might be the first who tried to outrun it by kicking everyone else down. Her eyes shimmered. I don't know if it was tears or just shame, but she blinked fast. I want the loan, she said softly. I know I've treated you terribly. I know you don't owe me anything, but I'm asking. I studied her carefully. The old her, the one full of pride, sharpness, and condescension, was still in there. But she was bruised now, shaken, and sometimes a person has to hit the bottom before the truth becomes loud enough to hear. Tell me something, I said. If this business fails, what happens to you and my son? Her voice cracked. We'd lose the house. And your marriage? She looked down again. I don't know. That was the part that twisted something in my chest. My son loved her. Not blindly, but deeply. I couldn't stand the thought of him being collateral damage in her storm. I stood up. She watched me like a child waiting for a verdict. You'll get the loan, I said. Her breath hitched. I will? But, I added, not because you deserve it, and not because you asked. You'll get it because my son doesn't deserve to suffer for your pride. Her eyes closed, a single tear slipping out. But understand this, I continued. This fund isn't a charity. It's not a family favor. It's business. You will follow every requirement, weekly reports, full transparency, and you will meet with our financial team, not me. I don't mix personal and professional. She nodded quickly. Yes, absolutely. And one more thing, I said quietly. You will treat my son with respect. You will treat me with respect. And you will stop pretending you're the only one in the room who knows anything. She swallowed hard. I will. I believed she meant it in that moment. But moments don't last forever, and something inside me sensed this wasn't the end of the lesson she needed to learn. It was only the first chapter. As she gathered her things and walked out of the room, still trembling, I stayed seated in the silence, because I knew something she didn't. Loans come with interest, and consequences do too, and hers were just beginning. She didn't sleep that night. I know because my son called me early the next morning, sounding more awake than any man should at 6 a.m. He said she'd been pacing the hallway, rewriting budgets, rereading contracts, and asking him questions she should have known the answers to months ago. Guilt can make a person study harder than ambition ever could. Fear can do even more. I didn't tell him about the meeting. It wasn't time. I wanted her to be the one to tell him. Not because I wanted to shame her, but because the person who admits their mistakes is very different from the one who hides them. And I needed to see which version of her would show up. That weekend I got my answer. They came over for dinner, my son carrying a pie he clearly didn't bake, and her walking behind him with the kind of fragile politeness you see in people who have recently had their ego cracked open. She barely spoke at first, just offered to help set the table, folded napkins a little too neatly, smiled a little too carefully. It wasn't the fake sweetness she used to wear like armor. This was something different, softer, nervous, human. Halfway through dinner, she finally said, "Harry, may I talk to you for a minute?" My son looked confused, but I nodded and followed her to the porch. The sun was dipping behind the trees, casting long orange streaks over the yard. She stood at the railing, twisting her wedding ring, a habit I'd only seen once before, on the day she married my son. "I told him," she said softly. "I told him everything." Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. She stood there bare, without makeup, without armor, without the sharp edges that used to cut everyone around her. "He was disappointed," she whispered. "Not angry, just disappointed, and that was worse." I didn't say anything. She wasn't looking for comfort. She was looking for solid ground. She continued, "I told him I applied to the fund. I didn't tell him it was yours. That's your story to share. But I told him about the loans, about the debt, about the way I talked to you." She swallowed. "He asked me why I treated you like that. I didn't have a good answer." "Maybe now you do," I said gently. She took a shaky breath. "I do. I thought I had to be the smartest person in the room. Every room. I thought if I wasn't, then I was nothing." For the first time, I saw her not as the woman who hurt me, but as someone who'd been hurting long before I ever met her. Then she added, "I'm going to fix the business. I'm going to follow every requirement. And if I fail, I'll fail honestly this time." I nodded. That's all anyone can ask. For a moment, I thought the story might end there. With growth, with humility, with the kind of healing real families hope for. But life doesn't like neat endings. 2 weeks later, Lydia called me. Her voice was calm, but calm in a way that made my stomach tighten.
"Harry, we've been reviewing the early numbers from her company," she said. "Some things aren't adding up."
My throat tightened. Not adding up how? There are expenses categorized incorrectly, payments that look deliberate, and if they were mistakes, they're strangely consistent. I closed my eyes. Not again. Not after everything she promised. Not after everything we laid bare. "Could it be incompetence?" I asked. "It could," Lydia said, "but incompetence doesn't usually repeat itself in the same shape, in the same places, over and over." A cold disappointment washed over me, a heavier one than before. Betrayal is easier to swallow from an enemy than from someone who swore they'd change. I needed clarity, so I drove to their house unannounced. My son opened the door with the usual warmth, but behind him, she stood with a stiffness I recognized instantly, guilt wearing the mask of politeness. I didn't waste time. "We need to talk," I said. She nodded and followed me to the living room, hands trembling. "Lydia called," I said. "She found discrepancies. You want to explain them?" Her knees buckled and she sank onto the couch. "Harry, I didn't do it on purpose." "That's what worries me," I replied. My son sat beside her, confused, his eyes darting between us. She pressed her palms to her face. "I thought I could handle it. I thought if I just adjusted a few things before the quarter ended, I could fix the numbers before anyone noticed." "That's not fixing," I said. "That's hiding." She shook her head frantically. No, I wasn't trying to steal. I wasn't trying to cheat you. I was trying to look competent. For you, for the team, for him. My son's voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me you were struggling again? And that's when she finally broke. I didn't want you to think I was a failure, she sobbed. I didn't want to be the woman who ruined everything twice. I sat down opposite her. I wasn't angry. Anger is too bright, too sharp. What I felt was deeper, a heavy, tired sadness. You don't have to be perfect, I said quietly, but you do have to be honest, with yourself, with him, with the people supporting you. No one can help you if you hide the truth. She cried quietly, shoulders shaking, the weight of 2 years of pressure sinking into the room like fog. After a long silence, she whispered, What happens now? What happens now? The question every person asks when they realize they've crossed a line they can never fully uncross. The loan stands, I said. But from this moment forward, you don't touch the books. Not one line. You work with the team. You follow their guidance. You learn the right way. She nodded slowly, tears streaking her cheeks. And the personal side? She asked. I looked at my son. That, I said softly, is between the two of you. But I knew something she didn't. Consequences don't always arrive in the form of punishment. Sometimes they arrive in the form of truth. And truth was finally knocking at her door. For a few weeks the house grew quiet, not silent in a cold way, silent in a thinking way. My son started taking long walks in the evening, the kind where you drag your feet because your thoughts are heavier than your steps. She kept her head down, attending every meeting with the financial team, showing up early, taking notes like a student desperate to finally understand the subject she'd been pretending to master for years. And me? I stood back, watching carefully, trying to figure out whether this was growth or fear wearing a temporary disguise. Then one night, close to midnight, my phone buzzed. It was my son. His voice was low, tired but not broken. Dad, can I come over? I told him to let himself in. He arrived 10 minutes later, hair messy, eyes red. He sat at my kitchen table the same way he used to when he was 10 and didn't want to admit another kid had hurt his feelings. He didn't speak for a while, just stared at the steam rising from the mug of tea I pushed in front of him. When he finally talked, he said, She told me everything, not just the numbers, everything. I didn't push, I just let him talk. He told me she confessed how terrified she'd been of being seen as less than, how she used arrogance as armor and control as a shield, how she felt like she had to prove she was worthy of the life she married into, even though we never asked her to prove a damn thing. She'd admitted her jealousy of how easily my son connected with people, how she hated that I didn't crumble under her judgments the way others did, how she feared the world would see her flaws the way she saw them herself. And finally, she told him the truth about me. That she'd spent years insulting the very person who had the power to save her. That she'd mocked me without knowing she was standing on land I watered with 4 decades of sweat. My son rubbed his face. Dad, she's ashamed, really ashamed. I don't know what to do with all of this. I nodded. Do you still love her? He didn't hesitate. Yeah, I do. Then don't throw her mistakes back in her face, I said softly. But don't pretend they didn't happen either. Make her meet you in the middle. Make her grow, and decide whether she's growing because she wants to, or because she's scared to lose you. He looked at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. Not as his father, not as the man in the old truck, but as a man who'd lived long enough to understand the way fear buries itself inside people. The next few months were rocky. Real growth always is. She worked with the financial team every day, slowly rebuilding her business with actual structure instead of smoke and mirrors. She told the truth even when it made her look bad. She made decisions with humility instead of ego. And little by little, I started seeing something I never expected from her. Respect. Not the forced, sugary kind, the real kind, the quiet kind that shows itself in how someone talks, listens, and moves. One afternoon, she requested a meeting, not with the team, not with my son, but with me. When she walked into the conference room this time, she wasn't dressed to impress. She wore a simple blazer, no bright lipstick, no carefully rehearsed smile. Just a woman ready to stand in the truth she'd spent years running from. She sat across from me and said, Harry, I'm ready. For what? I asked. To show you the numbers, all of them. I nodded. Then let's see them. She slid a folder across the table. The numbers weren't perfect, not even close, but they were honest. Expenses categorized correctly. Reports aligned with bank statements. Revenue projections built on real data instead of hope. A business no longer built on illusion, but on effort. When she finished walking me through it, she looked up and whispered, "I'm sorry for everything I put you through. For everything I put him through. I can't erase it, but I'm trying to become the kind of person who doesn't need to lie just to feel valuable." My sister said I wasn't real family because I didn't make enough money, so I bought the house she lives in and raised the rent 1 cent at a time. My brother-in-law mocked my old pickup truck for years, until the towing company he works for discovered I owned the entire fleet. My kids tried to force me into assisted living, so I let them find out who secretly owned the building. My nephew bragged about taking over the family business, until the lawyer revealed I still controlled every voting share. My ex-wife laughed when she took the house in the divorce, until she learned I owned the land under it. They told me I was too old to understand modern money, so I let them discover I wrote the code behind the app they depend on. My granddaughter called me outdated, until she realized the scholarship paying her tuition had my name on it.